There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for being here, everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and kick off our meeting of the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. Tonight is Thursday, December 4th. So thank you all for joining us in our Zoom environment here. Just really quick protocol. Just like to ask for folks if you can to keep your camera on, just because we are a public meeting. And so, and then to please not use the chat function. If you do have anything, I can see everybody's hands, or you can use the raise hand feature and I'll just try to pay attention. And if I'm spacing out and I don't see people, please feel free to just chime in and interrupt us. So, with that, if everyone's had a chance to review the agenda, I'm just looking for feedback or head nods just to know we're good to go with that. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up and head nods. And then, so we're just doing review only, it sounds like, of the Zoom meeting summary from October 16th. So if everybody's had a chance to watch that and just be up to speed on that, just kind of want to just check in with that. We don't need I don't think we need voting on minutes. We're not doing that. So, and then the last thing in my welcome items is any public comment that we have been received by staff. So I'll let Elena or Thea or Heather let us know if we have any of that.
We have not received any public comment, and we have 0 people in attendance, zero audience members.
Okay, perfect. Well, with that, I'm going to, sorry, I just had a pop-up come into so hopefully I'm not too frozen. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Thea for the Urban Growth Strategies Buildable Lands Inventory Land Supply Methodology.
Great, thank you. Tonight we are going to be diving into the Buildable Lands Inventory methodology, as Tiffany mentioned, and I will go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully I share the right one.
And Thea, I'm not we didn't talk about this, but hoping that you'll introduce yourself because I think there's some folks here that haven't met you yet.
Yes. So I am Thea Evans. I'm a senior GIS analyst with the planning division on the same team as Heather and Elena. And this is a presentation. We've given an iteration of this before to the Technical Advisory Committee. So for some of you, it might seem very familiar, but for some of you, it will be all new information. Feel free to ask questions as they come up. We don't need to wait until the end. I might be able to see if people have their hands raised, but I might not. So if there's been a hand raised for a while and I don't see it, just jump in and let me know. Do you all see the slide without notes?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. All right, well, we will go ahead and dive in. It's going to be very technical, very in the weeds. So for some of you, you'll really enjoy it. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the timeline for the Buildable Lands Inventory. The one that we currently have adopted is the 2012 to 2032 Buildable Lands Inventory, and that was conducted between August of 2012 and May of 2013. In 2021, we ran what we called a snapshot BLI, which was an intermediary BLI with an effective date of January 1st, 2021. And that was part of the monitoring program to get an updated look of where we were at with the Buildable Lands Inventory and to track permits in real time. The monitoring program is going to be doing that, and then we will run those intermediary BLIs every 5 years or so. And now it's time to go ahead and run another buildable lands inventory that will be adopted. So for that, we're calling it the 2027 to 2047 buildable lands inventory. What we're going to do is go ahead and run that model in January of this upcoming year, 2026. And then we're going to go ahead and bring it up to date in January of 2027. So what will be adopted will have an effective date of January 1st, 2027. And we will be adopting that by December of 2027. And that's going to tell us whether or not the urban growth boundary needs to be expanded for housing or for jobs or some combination of those. Before we dive into the details of it, I wanted to discuss a little bit about what actually is a buildable lands inventory. So it looks at both supply and capacity of the land within Eugene's urban growth boundary. First, it looks at or quantifies the supply of buildable land within the urban growth boundary by classifying each tax lot into 5 different categories: committed for public use, constrained due to natural resources or natural hazards, which we used to call protected, developed, partially vacant, and undeveloped, also known as vacant. Then the model estimates the residential and employment capacity on the buildable land. And today we are going to focus primarily on the supply portion of this equation, and we'll take a detailed look into each of those 5 development potential categories. So first off is committed lands. The model goes through and identifies in a geographic information system or GIS all lands that are committed for public use. And how we define this category is any property that is owned by a city government, a county government, a state government, and the state government also includes land that's owned by state-funded schools such as University of Oregon and Lane Community College. We identify federal government property, such as the Bureau of Land Management property. We look at park property, both are including city, county, and state park lands, as well as park easements. We also look at school district property like 4J and Bethel. Cemeteries are classified as committed land. And we also identify public utility property for water, wastewater, electric, and natural gas. We also include the Bonneville Power Administration easements that run within the urban growth boundary. And lastly, we include transportation rights of way, including streets and rail. Next, we identify the land that is considered constrained. So this category was previously called protected land in the adopted buildable lands inventory and in that last intermediary one that we ran. But we have decided to rename this category constrained in order to align with the state terminology and the administrative rules, and also what most other cities use across the state. So it just better aligns with both the data and the terminology that is being used elsewhere. So this chart looks at each of the inputs that are considered constrained, and it breaks down whether or not we have a difference in the source data from the adopted buildable lands inventory from 2012, and whether there's a difference in the methodology. So for floodways, protected in the adopted, constrained in what is our upcoming BLI, no difference in source data, no difference in methodology. Those are pretty easy, but we will dive into the details a little bit more on some of the other ones. So for the special flood hazard areas, which are also commonly known as the 100-year floodplain, That is not protected, not constrained, but there are some potential changes on the horizon for that. So the city is considering changing what is allowable on for building on those areas. So if the city is to institute new rules next year on how much building can be allowed on lots within the special flood hazard area, if they are to change what is allowed, then we may potentially consider that land to be constrained within the model in order to account for if there is less density allowed on those areas. For both Goal 5 riparian corridors and Goal 5 upland areas, we had a difference in the source data between the 2012 BLI and the 2027 BLI. So we actually went ahead several years ago and mapped what we believe are the estimated top of bank areas for both riparian corridors and the uplands. And we use that in the model now, and we'll be using it in the 2027 BLI model, whereas that was not the case in the 2012 BLI. We'll get into a little more details on that in some upcoming slides. But we did have a chance to go out and have some of our consultants look and kind of ground truth some of it, and they were pretty happy. We were pretty happy with the results of that. We think it's better than what we previously had. Next up, there's no changes to the Goal 5 wetlands or the Goal 6 water quality waterways. Also, no changes to critical habitat. For natural resource areas, there was a change in the source data. So for that, we now have, oh, Heather, yes.
Just wanted, before we moved on to the other ones, I just wanted to see if folks know what the Goal 5 and the Goal 6 means for natural resource protection. If anyone has questions about that, the statewide land use planning goals require cities to identify which wetlands and riparian areas are significant enough to warrant protection and building setbacks from them, and which would be okay to be developed, so they're a lesser quality and could get a development permit, a fill permit through the state. And so when we talk about Goal 5 and Goal 6, those are natural resources that we've protected through our code. So either the resource is protected itself or there's building setbacks at varying distances. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of what that is.
I've got Jeff with his hand up. Go ahead, Jeff, if you want to jump in. Jeff, you're muted and we can't unmute you.
There we go.
There you go.
Still sort of a rookie at this. Yeah, I want to step one back above the Goal 5 and the special hazard flood areas. That is a federal designation. And if there's city planning impacts in the BLI on it, is there any negotiation as to the exact lines of the 100-year floodplain? I mean, I haven't seen the map yet, so it's hard to know how constraining that's going to be if that's part of the negotiation for the 2027 BLI.
Good questions. So FEMA does set the boundaries for floodways and special flood hazard areas. The maps that are currently effective that we are required to use in the Buildable Lands Inventory are from 1999. They are quite old. The technology has changed a lot since then to be able to map flood elevations and modeling for what would happen in flood scenarios. FEMA is currently working to update those maps. They have been working to do that for, I believe, about 5 or 6 years now. They are in the process of going through the public process of doing that. The estimate for when those new preliminary maps will become effective continues to change. So what we are going to do is we are going to run the model with both the effective data from 1999 as well as the preliminary data that is available at the time we run the model that will hopefully turn into the final data that will become our new effective layers. But we're going to run it both so that if it does switch over to effective at some point, we can seamlessly make that change within the buildable lands inventory. There were some changes to the special flood hazard area, some pretty significant changes within the urban growth boundary, particularly around the Amazon Creek, sort of around like around 19th, that area. Actually, but it was areas that were taken out of the special flood hazard area, if I remember correctly. It wasn't areas that were added in. So we don't really have a say in areas to be taken out or in. That is sort of out of the purview of the city. But there was a lengthy public involvement process with homeowners and with cities and with the county. So there's not going to be any surprises, I would say, as to what is in or out of these flood areas. We've been seeing every set of preliminary data that's been released. So shouldn't be any surprises.
Okay.
Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah, just kind of following up. So I get, that the county, and I've reviewed some of these maps with the far greater resolution now with LiDAR mapping for floodplain areas. The thing that I'm interested in hearing maybe a little bit more about is, again, what is meant by potentially constrained here, because there may or may not be pretty dramatically different regulations that apply to development within special hazard flood areas, floodplain areas that traditionally have been allowed to be developed with, maybe some kind of mitigation and perhaps far more dramatic limitations on development. So do you just like flag any of the properties that are, and I don't mean to get ahead of us if I am, but when you get to the point of saying that there are potentially developable or partially vacant properties, are you just kind of flagging them because they are in this flood hazard area, independent upon how the regulations do or don't shake out? They may or may not have future development potential. And I'll give you an example, just, everybody that's, if you're kind of trying to think of like where this applies. The police department, the police headquarters is in a site on Country Club Road. It's now shown in the old BLI and will be on the future as committed. Okay. But they bought a property and a building that is in that special flood hazard area. I'm pretty sure that was built and was given a letter of map revision or letter of map amendment that allowed it to be considered to be outside of the floodplain restrictions, given the fact that there was probably fill or the foundation was built and such to be out of the floodplain boundary. So I'm just kind of wondering how you guys are going to have to account for that, or how you're planning on moving forward, given sort of this uncertainty of how these regulations may or may not fall in your project.
Yes, that's also a great question. So we essentially are taking the approach of we put everything into the model that we can. We put as much information in there as we possibly can, and then we can go back and adjust things later as necessary. So we're going to put in the preliminary data, and then if the regulations do happen in some way, then we can go in, and because we already have that information in the model, for the buildable acres that also are on the special flood hazard areas, if there's some new regulations around those areas specifically, then we can go ahead and either adjust the capacity down by a certain percent, so adjust the density that we factor into on the buildable but constrained areas there. Or we can, I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but if there were a scenario where something becomes unbuildable, we could go ahead and adjust that in the model as well. So the uncertainty is not, it's not really a problem for us at this point. We it's better that we know now, we know it's coming, and we're planning for it. So we don't think it'll be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we were on natural resource areas. So for these, we now use the natural resource areas from both the zoning layers and from our what will be our new land use designation map. So these are now parcel specific, which is wonderful. We know exactly where they begin and end, and we don't have to deal with sort of the less specific boundaries that we were using the last time around. And we don't have to rely on what used to be the land use information that we used for this, which sounds very similar to the land use designation map, but in reality was a completely separate data set that that LCOG used to maintain that looked at the general land use category of all land within Lane County. So we are no longer using that because it's not updated and because now we have much better parcel specific data through our land use designation map and our zoning map.
No more blob map.
Hopefully not.
It's really easy to see
it's-
on 11 by 17 piece of paper.
Yes. We are moving away and bringing it up into the 21st century finally. Okay, so historic properties is also considered protected / constrained. There are no changes to that data source or methodology. For prohibitively steep slopes, we consider above 30% constrained or protected. For the majority of designations, except for industrial land, we bump that down to 15%. And John, go ahead.
Is that slope a percentage that we picked, or is that one that was state mandated?
Oh, we're going to dive into that. What the state allows us to do in the administrative rules is to consider anything above 25% unbuildable. We have chosen to bump that up to 30%. So anything above 30% is unbuildable. We're going to go into a lot more examples in the upcoming slides about what that 30% looks like, and more detail about why we made that decision. to go up to 30 instead of the 25 that's allowed by the state. So we will get there in just a minute. But the difference in, oh, go ahead, Sue.
Can you give us just, by the way, it's really nice to see you again, Thea. It's been quite a while. I'm glad to know that you're still working on this project. That's fantastic. Could you guys give us just a quick example of critical habitat in the city?
Yes, yes. Okay, so critical habitat are habitat areas that are considered sort of breeding or areas where species that are federally listed as threatened or endangered use for their living space, their homes, or breeding areas. So it's just federally listed threatened and endangered species.
Okay, and so in the city, that's probably more likely to be something out West Eugene, in the wetland areas and that sort of thing.
Correct.
Okay.
I believe, I can't remember the names of the species off the top of my head, but the majority of them are plants within the urban growth boundary.
Right.
And they do fall within West Eugene.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, back to steep slopes. So the difference in source data for prohibitively steep slopes is that we now have much better LiDAR data available. So it's a much finer resolution, and we actually have new data from 2023 that we will be using in this upcoming BLI. For landslide risk, there was a difference in source data. We have some newer landslide risk data from the Department of Geological and Mineral Resources. Is that what it is? You'll notice here, though, that it was not considered protected in the 2012 BLI, and we will not be considering it constrained in the upcoming Buildable Lands Inventory. That is because that data set of landslide risk has not been adopted locally. However, we're not too concerned about it because the majority of that landslide risk is also what happens to be areas that we consider already to be prohibitively steep slopes. So we feel pretty comfortable that we are already accounting for the majority of that risk with saying that slopes above 30% are not buildable, and we're not counting any jobs or housing capacity on those areas. Lastly, we have water bodies, which were not considered, and these are water bodies that are not protected in the previous categories of the Goal 5 riparian, upland, and wetland areas. So these are not protected water bodies. Any small ponds or creeks that are not otherwise protected. So in the 2012 BLI, these were not considered protected because they don't have any protections through zoning on them. However, in the 2027 BLI, we are considering them to be constrained. This is a little bit of a difference, but essentially we don't want to be counting or assuming any capacity on these because at the time being, they are not buildable. It would take an enormous amount of resources, even though they're not protected, to fill them in some way, shape, or form, or to do the pre-development steps that would be required in order for these to develop. So we don't want to be counting any phantom capacity on these areas that are not likely to be developing. And Heather, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention that this issue came up in the rulemaking, the state's rulemaking that they've been working on for the past couple years that we've been participating in, and we brought up this issue, and this was actually how it was suggested that it be addressed. So still including the land in your inventory, but not assigning capacity to it. And so that's different from land that we're saying, or like water bodies that we're saying are protected under goal 5 or goal 6. We're not identifying it buildable and thus not putting any capacity on it. So that's the just a finer point on what Thea was saying, and that it's something that we didn't feel that we had legal standing for that before, but there have been other jurisdictions that have done this and had their BLI adopted. And so, and then again, through the rulemaking that we've been participating on, this was the guidance we were given, which is good news.
I've got Phil and then John.
Is there any consideration for greenway properties to be considered constrained or partially constrained if they are, I mean, otherwise zoned such that they could be developed for one use or another?
So we do include the greenway in the model, but we do not consider it to be constrained land at this point.
Okay, thanks.
John, go ahead.
Under the natural resources area, I know in the last time we went around with this, there was talk about natural resources. So let's say mining or quarrying that has not going to be used anymore, that it's reached its useful life as a quarry, but is still listed as a natural resource area. Are we, is there a way to look at those as not constrained anymore?
So I don't believe that we have any of those that meet what you just said within the urban growth boundary. However, if I think this was something that we dealt more with during urban reserves when we were considering the areas that were north of the urban growth boundary, but just south of the Mackenzie River. So they are protected Goal 5 resources for mining operations. They are different from what we consider to be natural resource areas. But if the urban growth boundary were to expand into areas that have active mining permits and that were considered Goal 5 protected for mining operations, I believe, Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, they would have to go through the process of giving up those mining permits, and I believe it would be the property owners that would need to initiate the removal of themselves from the Goal 5 inventory in order to have those protections removed.
Yeah, they essentially, I don't remember who has to initiate it. Obviously, yeah, the property owners would have to sign off, but the main gist of it is that they would have to get off the inventory. And so I think to get off the inventory, they can't be active anymore,
Okay, thank you.
amongst other things. Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take a closer look at slope. So areas with slope above 15% for industrial designated lands are considered protected or constrained. And for residential and commercially designated land, that goes up to 30%. So anything above 30% we consider unbuildable for residential and commercial lands. You'll see here that we've got a difference in the source data between the adopted 2012 BLI and our upcoming 2027 BLI. So the image on the right side of the slide at the top is what we used in the 2012 BLI, and it was a 10-meter pixel size. So a 10 by 10 meter square was given one elevation value, which if you're looking here, you can see for Skinner Butte, it made it look pretty blurry. There wasn't a whole lot of detail in a 10 meter by 10 meter pixel size. But with new LiDAR data from 2023, we now have a pixel size of about 3 feet by 3 feet. So suddenly a lot more detail becomes apparent. You can see streets, you can see individual buildings, you can see the columns there on the west side of the butte. But we've got much better data now for elevation. So that's the difference in the source data. And we'll go into a little more detail in the next slides about 30% and why we're using that instead of the lower state threshold of 25%. So here's just a little reminder of what percent slope is and how it differs from angle slope. So percent slope here, you can see this purplish A triangle. This is where the slope angle is 30%, but the actual percentage is 58. So just a fun geometry reminder, when you're calculating the percent slope, it's rise over run. But the angle is where it's actually measuring the angle and how different it is from what would be flat. So just fun examples to take you back to high school. But here you can see on the left-hand side a slope of 33%, which is the closest that we've got to 30, and it's less than one might imagine in their mind when they're thinking about slope, because it is so different from that angle slope that we commonly think of when we think of slope. So it is possible to have more than 100% slope. Just another weird thing to keep in mind. But yeah, I just wanted to throw this in there just to give a nice reminder of percent slope and what it actually looks like. And now we will take a look at a real life example from Eugene. So we do see quite a bit of development on areas that are above 30% slope. Here is an example from, I believe it's southeastern Eugene, and some new development that occurred there. You can see these tax lots here. They actually have these yellow areas that are all above 30% slope. So they were still able to build houses on it, and you can see from the actual street view what that looks like in real life. And then to dive into some details about how we treat slope within the model, because as you can see here, the slope varies across a tax lot. The boundaries don't follow tax lot boundaries because they're natural boundaries, not man-made ones. So there's obviously a lot of different levels of slope occurring within a tax lot. So how we account for that within the buildable lands inventory model is what we call predominant slope. So we calculate what is the largest area by slope, or sorry, the largest slope area within a tax lot by area. And we say that is the predominant slope of the lot. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the majority slope of the lot, but it is the largest by area for that tax lot. And so we look at the slope categories in 5% increments, and then we go ahead and calculate the predominant slope for each tax lot. Jeff, yes.
Just a quick question. Is that before or after terracing or, man-made creation of slope?
Good question. This was before that happened. because the collection of this slope data was from 2009, and I believe the building didn't occur until sometime around 2020, following 2020. So this is what the slope looked like before any grading or erosion, any type of development occurred on these lots.
So, because I'm sort of a rookie at this, steep slope doesn't prohibit any development within the city. It's just for the BLI statistical purposes, you're less likely to have anything other than a very low density on it.
Correct. The city does not say that you can't build on slopes above 30%. However, there is a geotechnical review that is triggered for permitting above a certain slope percentage. So while it is allowed, it does usually occur at less density, and it's also more expensive to build on areas of steeper slope. So it is allowed, and we do still see it happen, which is why we don't want to go or choose not to go with the 25% threshold that we are allowed to use by the state, because we do see a lot of development occurring on those lots. And also, if you take a look at the charts here, the number of lots that fall into a predominant slope category of 25 to 30% are actually very small. So it's actually only 157 tax lots within the urban growth boundary, which is actually, if you consider the size of those lots, it's only about 2% of the land within the urban growth boundary. So even if we were to change our methodology for the buildable lands inventory, it wouldn't really result in a large difference with our inventory overall, which is why we feel comfortable moving ahead with 30% because it wouldn't have that big of an impact. And also, we do see development occurring above 25%
Thanks.
slope. John?
Sorry.
So I guess my question would be, I understand the rationalization that you're making for that, but it seems to me that that's a policy uh, decision, and I'm just wondering who gave the authority to go to 25 to 30? Because even if it is 100 and something houses, and maybe it's 50 acres or 25 acres, that is something that's considered when we're looking at our UGB expansion. So explain to me why this isn't a policy decision and how it can be made internally with staff.
So I'm going to jump in. Not a policy decision. This is a methodology decision. So I think this is one of the things that we can adjust in the buildable lands inventory if we wanted to use a different percentage. This is the same percentage we used last time when we reviewed this with the ETAC and the time before. So I think we've done it. We've used the 30% cutoff 3 times in the buildable lands inventory instead of the 25%. But a lot of these inputs is what I would call it, are or factors are things are part of the methodology that we can discuss here. So I just want to make that really clear. This isn't a policy question. This is a methodology question. And I think Thea is explaining why we've done it this way over the past every time that we've run the BLI. This is where we've ended up, but it's definitely, that's why we're reviewing it. It's for discussion. So we're proposing that we continue that, I think is what Thea is saying, is we were proposing to continue that, but again, up for discussion.
Phil?
First off, Thank you so much. This is terrific work. And this graphic, this one slide is just amazing. Way to go. I think you have boiled down a whole bunch of really difficult principles and 3D calculations and stuff into a single slide, giving us a real world example, and that is so helpful. So thank you so much. The other part, though, is just sort of, even though we've done this a couple of times before, and it's the sort of the way it's been done and all this, and there's only 6% of the land within the UGB that we're talking about, and there's 4,242 tax lots that fall within this category. I mean, and you've got this real compelling image of an exact instance where somebody has been able to build, even though it's at 30% or greater. Do we know how many units have been built to this, within this strata of those 4,242 tax lots, and how many units that represents? Just trying to think of thinking out loud, if whatever us or the council were to say, no, change your methodology, bring it from 30 to 25, what does that mean? Would that result in, it's 6% of the area within the UGB, but would it mean that translates into 1,000 more dwelling units that couldn't possibly theoretically be built? Or is it, hey, we've only built these dozen or so that you're showing on the photograph, and that's it? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but we could look that information up. But I do want to reiterate that these are all tax lots within the urban growth boundary. So and a lot of these are already developed. The majority of the land within the urban growth boundary is developed already. So if we were considering what a change in the threshold would look like, it would be much smaller than the numbers in this graph, because we would only be talking about tax lots that are classified as undeveloped or as partially vacant. So
Okay.
it would be a much smaller
Right.
amount that we're talking about.
Well, just before you take any other questions or comments, just suggestion here. You may want to have that number in your back pocket, because somebody may ask a question like this, further down the road, and just sort of say, hey, are we leaving anything on the table, taking too much out, or whatever? So
Yeah, and we can definitely look up that information and provide that to the committee.
okay.
Heather, did you want to make a clarifying? Because then I'll call on Counselor Kaczynski when you're done.
Yeah, just real quick. It's not the 4,000, correct me if I'm wrong, Thea. It's not the 4,242 lots that are in question. It's the 157. There's 157 lots, which, like Thea said, it's just less than that, that are that are 25% to 30%. And so, yeah, so I think what she's saying is that if we increase it, or if we decrease it, counterintuitive, and say that instead of 30% or greater is not buildable, but that 25 to 30 is also not buildable, it's 157 lots that would be impacted. So we're already assuming those 4,242. We're not assuming capacity on those. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much.
And then to get even more precise with that clarification, just because those lots have a predominant classification of a 25 to 30% slope, if we were to consider that to be unbuildable, it doesn't mean that if they were vacant, that all of the capacity on those lots would go away, because we look at we use that predominant slope classification in order to determine the density of the capacity that we apply to the lots. But when we're looking at the supply side, we're really concerned with just the actual portions of the lots, like this graphic towards the right side of the screen, the yellow portion of the lot that has the steep slopes, what we consider to be prohibitively steep slopes. So it would just add that light green band around this yellow that we would consider to be unbuildable for these tax lots. Now, if the amount of buildable land for a residential tax lot falls below what is our threshold of 3,500 square feet, then that would trigger the lot to not have any capacity calculated on it. So it gets real strange real fast. Or very detailed very quickly. But essentially it wouldn't result in that much of a difference for our overall capacity. I don't believe, because we're only talking about 2% of the area within the UGB, some of which is probably already developed or is considered committed or constrained for natural resources. So we're talking about what could potentially be quite a small change. Just want to throw that out there.
Thanks,
Eliza,
Dad.
yes.
Yeah, I got Eliza.
And thank you. And just to clarify, as part of this process, if we say something is unbuildable or we're not going to count it as buildable land, the impact of that is when we're doing our math to figure out how much buildable land we have, that number's a little bit smaller. Not that if somebody is creative, they couldn't figure out how to build on it. It's not placing any restriction on the land as far as what someone can do. It's acknowledging that there are potential restrictions that exist there anyway.
Correct. That what we're saying is if something is not buildable, it means we are not estimating future residential or jobs capacity. It does not mean that they that someone couldn't come in and pay for the correct permitting and do some engineering work and meet the geotechnical specifications and build something on that land. It just means that we are not assuming residential or jobs capacity on it.
Okay, so someone could get creative and then we would have an extra house that we weren't planning on having.
Yes.
Okay.
If I could just add on to that, even some of the area that we're considering protected for goal 5 or goal 6, there are some exemptions in our land use code for being able to develop within setback areas for natural resources, such as if there's already like a parking lot there, there's been development there or something like that. And so you can build on top of it. And so the BLI isn't precise enough I mean, it's very precise. It's much more precise than our adopted BLI, the new BLI is, but it's not going to get to that level of like carving out the protected area because there's, maybe a building footprint in the setback area that actually you could build on top of per our code, so we actually do end up seeing, which is kind of ends up looking weird in our data that we'll see some housing or some development on what we've identified as protected land in the buildable lands inventory. But it's all about just trying to get a reasonable estimate for how much future capacity we have. That's all we're trying to do. So we're just trying to narrow in on what we think is the best guess for how much future buildable capacity we have.
Yeah, and I feel like those cases where we're saying something's not buildable, but someone decides to build there anyway, probably get balanced out by the lots where it's like, this is a prime buildable lot and whoever owns it is never going to sell it and never going to develop it. And so you end up with that sort of balance of what happens in the real world versus.
Yeah. Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to add a good case study on steep slope development might be the south slope of Gillespie Butte. I know you had a LiDAR map of Skinner Butte, but 2 years ago there was nothing at the top of the south slope of Gillespie, and now there's about 15 residential developments going on it might be a good look back to assess what you thought might have happened there versus what's actually happening there. Because 2 years from now, or 2 years from now, there's gonna be about 15 homes on that south slope. And I would have never imagined it was possible given the incredibly steep slopes that are there on that south side.
Yes, that is a good idea for a future case study.
Okay, Phil.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. So, regardless of the slope and the percentage slope, is there not a prohibition that's in the South Hill study way back when that prohibits new development above 900 feet in elevation? Or is that, or am I dreaming that?
Doesn't prohibit it, but it makes it difficult.
Okay. So you're accounting for all that too, right? So
Yes, so we're not going to get into the supply or the capacity side really today, but we will at some future meetings. But what the 2012 Buildable Lands Inventory did was for it has a reduced capacity for lots above 900 feet, and specifically for I can't remember exactly, but for certain size categories, it only counts one dwelling unit per lot. So it's not a calculation of number of dwelling units per acre, but per lot. That's how we accounted for that.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't see any hands, so
All right, that concludes the slope discussion then, unless we want to open it back up later. Now we're going to move on to estimating the top of bank and how the source data that we're using uh, for both the upland areas, the Goal 5 upland areas, the Goal 5 riparian areas, as well as the West Eugene wetland protected waterways changed. So those protected waterways were all mapped sometime in the 2000s using less precise data than we have available now. So in 2020, we went ahead and mapped out what we believe to be the top of bank based on 2009 LiDAR data that was available at the time. So we used the imagery, the aerial imagery from you see in this top right image. We also used the 2-foot contour data that were derived from the LiDAR data, as well as slope data and hillshade data. We used all of that together and went through and mapped exactly where we estimate that top of bank to be purely based on the GIS data. And you can see here on the images on the right, that's for the Willamette, just south of Valley River Center. The image on the left is where this LiDAR data became really powerful. So you can see this green outline with a blue line running through it. That is where the data we were working with that was mapped in the mid 2000s. So that was the stream path that was used. However, the LiDAR data shows a pretty different story once you get into the tree canopy area, where before we just didn't have information about it. And now with the LiDAR data, it's much more precise and it allows you to really look through the trees and see that sort of bare earth much more clearly. So that's why we decided to go ahead and use that as an input for the buildable lands inventory. And we did have some consultants go out to different areas along the Willamette on both the north and south bank to sort of verify and ground truth what we had estimated to be the top of bank. And we did adjust it in a couple of areas, but we were pretty happy with what we had estimated solely using GIS. And found that it was doing a pretty good job in the majority of cases. So just a reminder though, this is not a replacement for anyone doing a survey. If any development comes in and they have a Goal 5 resource on the property, we are in no way saying that this replaces a professional surveyor. But we're saying for the purposes of the buildable lands inventory, where we're trying to get an overall look at everything within the urban growth boundary, that we think this is a pretty good compromise. We think it's getting us closer than what we had available before, and it's been pretty good so far. So this is why we're suggesting using it. And John, do you have a question?
Yeah, my only question, I guess my question is, how far back from top of bank do we go as far as the setback?
So that depends on the resource. And each resource is classified according to the inventory, the initial inventory that was done. So some resources have no setback protection. It's just from top of bank. And other resources, I believe we go up to a setback of 100 feet is the largest setback, and that's for the Willamette River. So it varies depending upon the resource.
Yeah, and the reason I brought that up is because on major ones like the Willamette and the Mackenzie, those banks shift very much. I mean, you can go 100 feet. You can go, if you look at the historical data of where the rivers are, they switch year to year with not even with a 100-year flood, with a heavy rain can take a bank and go back 50 feet. No problem. We've seen it. I've seen it with my eWeb hat on, and I've seen houses that were built and they were falling into the river 2 years later. So I think on the major ones, we need to at least go back 100 feet.
Yep. Those are set. So we just use whatever is in the adopted inventory. But yes, there are between 0 and 100 feet, depending upon the resource. So that basically wraps up the deep dive into all of the components of what we consider to be protected, now called constrained. And we're going to now look into the development status or development potential of the tax lots, which is the next thing that our model looks at. So in 2012 to 2032, this relied a lot on assessor information, most notably the improvement value that the assessor assigned to each tax lot. It also used the LCOG land use layer that I had mentioned before, which was a layer for the entire county that gave a generalized land use category to every area, every parcel. That has not been updated since 2012. So we don't have we can't use it moving forward because it's no longer kept up to date. The 2012 model also used the regional address layer. And so in the upcoming 2027 BLI, some of these inputs are going to change a little bit because of the data availability. So we still are using assessor information. We're still using that improvement value. But because we don't have that land use layer from LCOG anymore, we've switched to using the property class information from the Lane County assessor as a replacement for that. So this is supposed to be updated every time a property is sold. And it gives us a little bit better of an update cycle. So the data are being updated. maybe not annually or anything, but it gives us a better look at what's going on the property. We also are using that same regional address layer, and we also are now using the building footprint layer. So all of these things together we're using to get an idea of what is going on for every property within the urban growth boundary. And is it developed, undeveloped, or is it developed but room for some more development to occur? So that's the information we're using. And what specifically do we consider to be undeveloped? What sort of criteria do all of those inputs need to meet? So for a tax lot to be classified as undeveloped by the model, it needs to meet every single one of these 5 criteria. So it can't be committed for public use. It has to have an improvement value of less than $1,000 assigned by the assessor. And we will touch on that improvement value a little bit more in the next slide. It has to have an undeveloped property class code, also assigned by the Lane County assessor. It cannot contain an address point, and it cannot contain a building footprint. If all of those criteria are met, the model says, great, it's undeveloped. So one thing that we wanted to take a closer look at was this improvement value of less than $1,000. That was the threshold that was used in the 2012 BLI. As you all know, inflation has occurred since then. So we wanted to take a look and see whether or not that threshold of $1,000 indicating significant improvement still held true within the assessor database. So we took a closer look at that. And here are the distribution of assessor improvement values for everything less than 30,000. As you can see from the graph, $1,000 still seems to be a pretty natural break point in the data. I don't know why that is, but it still seems to be that way. So we are proposing to continue with that $1,000 threshold. If there is conflicting information that's coming back from the model, we are going to go ahead and look at that and manually take a closer look. But for just the model to decide, we still think that because of this large break in the improvement values for less than 1,000 and above 1,000, that's still a good threshold to continue using. John, go ahead.
So I guess my question would be, what would be considered improvements? So like if somebody goes and puts a septic system in, that's well over $1,000. Would that be considered an improvement?
Not according to the assessor.
Okay, so
So
what constitutes an improvement?
Improvement is a building of some sort, a structure. It can be a very large billboard. It could be a paved parking lot, but it would not be a gravel parking lot. And sometimes it might be like a radio or a cell phone tower. But for those, because they don't meet all of the other criteria, those types of lots are generally flagged for manual review. Okay, so we've gone through what's considered undeveloped. Now let's take a look at what is developed. So similarly, it has to meet 5 different criteria for a tax lot to be considered developed. It has to meet all of them. So once again, it can't be committed. It has to have an improvement value of greater than or equal to $1,000. It has to have a developed property class code. It has to contain an address point, and it has to contain a building footprint. If all those criteria are met, the model says, great, it's developed. And then we continue moving forward. Um, and so for everything that is initially assigned as developed, we go ahead and take a look and see, could it possibly be available for partially vacant status, which means that it is developed, but we further evaluate it to determine whether there is additional buildable land on the lot. So for tax lots to be considered partially vacant, they have to meet all the criteria of developed, and then they have to meet some additional criteria. So the additional criteria are that the area of the tax lot has to be greater than or equal to the partially vacant threshold size. So, oh, this is strange. This is the right slide for that. So the partially vacant threshold size, sorry about that. The table here breaks down what it was for the 2012 BLI and what we're proposing it to be for the 2027 BLI. So for low density residential, it used to be 1 acre. So the tax lot had to be 1 acre or larger to be even considered eligible for a partially vacant classification. For the upcoming 2027 BLI, we are proposing that this threshold size go down to 1/2 acre. This is in alignment with the new administrative rules that will be coming out. They haven't been finalized yet. So we are keeping an eye on it. But there is a new safe harbor that would allow us to consider lots that are 1/2 acre or greater as partially vacant. And so we would like to move to be in alignment with that new safe harbor.
And if I can jump in. So safe harbor. So just a reminder or new information if you don't know what a safe harbor is. So in the state land use planning rules, safe harbors are assumptions, inputs, projections, something like that you can assume in your analysis or incorporate into your analysis and not get appealed on. So there's like a million things you can get appealed on. But if one of those things is that if there's something that's a safe harbor, and you use that in your analysis, that's, one less thing that you can get appealed on. So it's safe. It's a safe harbor. And so they're kind of like gold in your analysis because again, there's so much that goes into, as you're seeing, this is one important component of the long-term urban growth boundary land use planning, the buildable lands inventory, and you're already seeing how many inputs go into just this component. So anytime there's a safe harbor, we want to be able to use it if it makes sense. And this is a safe harbor that was not available for large cities. But the new rules, like Thea said, we kind of pushed for being able to add a safe harbor for large cities on this front. So that's why we want to avail ourselves to be able to use it this time. Or not this time, but actually have it. Once it's adopted, we will actually be able to use it.
Thanks, Heather.
Jeff's got a question.
Oh, yes.
Have you made an estimation as to how many more lots by reducing the low density residential down to 1/2 acre, how many new lots that's going to put into potentially vacant status? Is it statistic?
We have not done that yet, done that analysis, because we would actually have to be running the BLI to be able to figure that out. So it's not something that we can determine ahead of time, but we will be able to tabulate that once we start running the analysis. And just because a low density residential lot is greater than 5 acres, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will automatically go from developed to partially vacant. It still does need to meet the criteria that there is additional buildable land on the lot that meets our minimum lot size requirements as specified in the land use code. So
Maybe
it
I'm
will
jumping
result.
ahead, but that's the key question is, even looking at your example on the previous slide, there's, there's residential structures in the front center of the lot, and there's a lot of what we call backyard, lot dog run or whatever. Is that buildable or not? It's each lot's going to have its own answer to that. And
Correct.
what criteria can you use statistically to determine over thousands of whether it's buildable in that backyard or not?
Oh, we're about to get into that information. Yes, that is the power of GIS, which is how we're able to do this all. But yeah, we will get into that in just a minute.
Okay, great.
hmm Um, so for medium density residential, the threshold size was 0.5 acres. We are saying that we should continue with that threshold. For industrial land, the previous threshold size for partially vacant was 10 acres. However, we're proposing to change that to 5 acres for 2027, which is in line with the administrative rules. So essentially, same thing that we were talking about with low density residential, we want to use and follow the administrative rules where possible. So that's why we're proposing that change for industrial. And then for all other land use designations, it's staying the same at 1 acre. But the if the new administrative rules provide new guidance or that upon that, we might change that. Or if once we get into the analysis, some new pattern emerges, that's when we would come back and present that information to all of you to see whether or not we should be adjusting that threshold size for other designations. And then the final criteria, which we touched on a little bit, is that for something to be considered partially vacant, there has to be additional buildable land on the lot. And we will go into how we determine that. So first of all, we take a look at the existing development that occurs on the lot. This used to be a manual process. So for the 2012 BLI, this was calculated by hand by some of you that are in this virtual meeting right now. So it was a very laborious process from what I understand and quite time intensive. And now we have automated it within GIS. So first we take all the building footprints and we go ahead and buffer them 15 feet. Well, it does not want to show the animations for this slide.
Oh, I think it might be a Zoom thing.
Oh, okay.
I think sometimes when you're sharing.
Nope,
Oh, it didn't?
figured it out. Yep.
I stand corrected.
Okay. So we buffer all of the building footprints 15 feet. Then we generate what's called a minimum bounding rectangle that contains all of those building footprints and their buffers within each individual tax lot. What a minimum bounding rectangle is the smallest rectangle that can contain all of that information or all of those areas. So I go ahead and that's what that green box is. But you'll notice some of those green boxes pass over into neighboring tax lots. And we don't want to be calculating that as non-buildable for those neighboring tax lots or as existing development. So what we go ahead and do is we lop those off. So now we've got the yellow boxes. And those yellow boxes are what we use to say that's the existing development for each lot. And we say the rest of the lot, as long as it doesn't contain any constrained or committed fragments, then we say the rest of the lot is buildable. However, if there are constrained fragments on there, we would subtract that from the buildable land as well. So we're not going to be counting any constrained fragments as buildable, and we also don't count the existing development as buildable for the lot. So if the remaining buildable land on the lot is more than the minimum threshold size allowed by the Eugene Land Use Code, then we say, yes, that lot can be classified as partially vacant. Counselor Kaczynski.
Is it just sort of like a mathematical formula, or is there any sort of consideration to the configuration of the partially vacant land on the lot? So like I'm looking at one of these ones on the corner where like when you have outside the rectangle, it's like, two non-adjacent corners. Does that factor in at all when you're looking at the partially vacant?
Good question. So we do have, in general, it's pretty straightforward, the mathematical equation. However, in certain areas, we know and recognize that this automated calculation is not doing a good job. And so we have some built-in quality control flags. So essentially, we flag anything where the yellow shape that's drawn around to encompass all of that existing development, where it's very long and narrow, we flag that and say, oh, we think something's wrong here. This isn't doing a great job of estimating the existing development. And then we go and manually review it. We also look at the area of building footprints to the overall area of that yellow shape. And if the building footprint to the shape ratio, if it falls below a certain amount, we know something's up. It's not doing a great job because a lot of what it's calculating as existing development doesn't actually contain a building. Then we go back and look at it manually. So in general, this approach does pretty well, except when the lots get very large. It's really terrible for farm areas, places with a lot of outbuildings. It does not do a very good job. For places with very, very long driveways, it does not do a good job. For like flagpole tax lots, it does not do a very good job. So for those areas, we go back and manually review the existing development to make sure that we're not over or underestimating.
Thanks.
Jeff?
Yeah, I just see a logical issue with the areas that are outside the yellow rectangles on this, and that if you have a main structure on a house, very few property owners are ever going to consider building something in the front driveway in between the primary structure and the street. You could consider building ADUs behind some of these structures, but I just don't see how anything between the yellow rectangle and the street could ever be actually usable for any kind of secondary structure.
I mean, for certain ones, yes, that's true. What I forgot to mention on this, and so thank you for that reminder, is we actually have what we consider to be a minimum amount that we consider to be for existing development. So if and it helps to get at that issue that you're talking about. So it it looks at the existing development. If the yellow shape that it draws to encompass the existing development falls below, um, and we still need to sort of discuss what we're using as the threshold for the 2012 buildable lands inventory. It was 0.33 acres for flat land, and I believe it was half an acre for sloped land. So if the area of the existing development that is automated falls below that threshold, then we go ahead and bump it up automatically to the minimum threshold. And that way we're not it gets at that issue that you're talking about where, yeah, people don't really want to toss a house into their front yard. Or that's much less likely to happen. Um, and so that's how we deal with that problem.
Okay.
And we will probably we will be reevaluating that or making sure that those minimum threshold sizes for existing development still work with what we're seeing on the ground.
I also want to add to that. If we were a smaller city, we might have the capacity or not, because if we were a smaller city, we might not have any planners. But if you had a smaller geographic area you were looking at, you might have the capacity to do a more fine-grained level of analysis like that, like shadow platting is kind of what we call it. We don't have the capacity to do that. Eugene's too big. And so, like Thea said, last time we did do a manual review and we're building off of that. But we don't have the capacity to go in and go, okay, yeah, we do or don't think that this lot is gonna put a house in its front yard or not. And funnily, we actually have seen that. So we have seen people building smaller units, not a ton, but it does happen. And then the house in the back or whatever ends up being another unit. The other thing I would say is that with the new rules, so that's one side of it. The other thing I would say is with the new rules, is that we've been pretty constrained about how much land we can take off and not count as buildable in our buildable lands inventory. The old rules were pretty much like, it doesn't really matter what you think. It was like, if it's a large lot and it's got an area without a home on it, you have to count it in your inventory. It doesn't really matter if it's a big house or like the reasonable test, like that wasn't a thing, because it's pretty hard to make those assumptions. We have land that we thought wasn't ever going to develop, right? And then it was in a trust, and then somebody, finally the trust decides to sell it, right? Like things like that happen. And so what we pushed for, what cities pushed for, and the state listened, is that we have a concern that we're overestimating capacity on land that, like you said, we just really don't think is going to develop, but the rules basically require us to assume future capacity on it. And so the rules, the draft rules will allow us to make a market factor adjustment on specifically on partially vacant land, so that we're basically recognizing that not all of the land that meets the partially vacant definition is actually going to redevelop or add development in the next 20 years. So that's a huge win, because we heard a lot about that, and I think other cities have too, about the phantom capacity that we were being required to build into our buildable lands inventories. So TBD on how we will actually implement that. Because again, the rules are still being drafted, but it's good to know that we will be able to kind of tamp down the estimated capacity on partially vacant land specifically.
Sorry, I have Eliza.
Thanks. And like when we're talking about things like middle housing and middle housing lot divisions and things like that, that is mostly going into the capacity side of the calculations. Is that right? Okay. Because I am seeing a lot of those, like I'm seeing a lot of middle housing lot division come through on lots that are less than half an acre. And so those would have been lots that we would have previously assumed were fully developed. And now they're like, okay, well, we think we can fit another house or two on this. And so like there may be some balancing there as well, where on some of these larger lots, we're assuming a unit isn't can be added because there's more space. And maybe what we'll see is maybe this one doesn't add one, but a lot that we would have assumed wouldn't have added a unit does. And so there might be some balancing there too.
Yes, and that's an important point to make. We know we're not going to get the details on every single lot within the urban growth boundary exactly right. And we don't have, as Heather mentioned, we don't have the capacity to go through with the fine-tooth comb and tease out all of those details. So we recognize that in some cases we are overestimating capacity, and in others we are underestimating capacity. And the goal is to come up with a reasonable total estimate within the urban growth boundary, by following the rules that the state sets out. And so that is our overall goal for this process. And we know that it won't be perfect in every individual tax lot case. So that wraps up partially vacant, unless anyone has any other questions. Okay. So at this point in the model, it's gone through everything and it's classified what it can. However, there's still quite a bit that didn't fit into those perfect categories of meeting all the criteria. So what gets kicked back to us out of the model is properties that have conflicting information, or those ones that have existing development where it's sent us back some sort of flag saying, hey, we don't think the automated method did a great job of estimating the existing development. So for those cases, we go back and we have staff manually review by looking at the aerial imagery. We look at some property information, and then we make a determination based on that. And we have a set of standard notes that we put in so that we know exactly how a decision was reached and how we got there. And that way we're following the same process for each property. So here's some examples of things with conflicting information where we go ahead and do the manual review. So these highlighted tax lots, they each have an address point. They don't have a building footprint. The assessor says they have no improvement value, and the assessor has them set to a vacant property class. Here's a case where we would go in and we would look up the information for these lots. we would look at the address point to see when it was created in the system. And then if it was a more recent address, we would go and look and see, have building permits been issued prior to the effective date of the buildable lands inventory? So with the upcoming buildable lands inventory, we would look and say, have there been building permits issued for these lots prior to January 1st, 2026? And then it would end up being updated the following year prior to January 1st, 2027. So if the building permits were issued prior to the effective date, we would go ahead and say that the lot is developed. So, oh, go ahead, Phil.
Just one question. So the property class thing, I'm not real familiar with it, but on the tax statements, it'll just say 101 residential, something like that. So let's just say on this particular map, it's got a dot on it, it's got an address, used to be a house on it, probably got knocked down, right? So if that's the case, that's probably why it has an address point. No improvement value because it's been knocked down. How frequently does the county actually, whereas you're saying they would change the property class, probably if something went from residential to commercial, but they don't necessarily change it every time a property changes hands, right? It's only when, some kind of other trigger that, improvement greatly exceeds a certain amount, and then they kind of look at it again. In this case, is there a connection there between the city issuing a demo permit, this property becoming vacant, and then the county actually putting a vacant property class? And if they don't do that very quickly or at all or often, they don't get flagged. And unless they just kind of happen upon it for some reason. And if it were still in a residential property class, would you miss this somehow? Or would, through doing all this mechanical work that you have to do, are you going to find that out, suss it out yourself?
Yeah, so we are not so concerned with whether it's actually, we're not concerned at all with whether the assessor says that it's residential or commercial because
Okay.
we go based on the land use designation for that.
Okay.
So that's not an issue. What we found in looking at the assessor data and doing the buildable lands inventory is that there is quite a lag with the assessor data. So it takes them a while to update it as development occurs or as demolition occurs. And so when we're looking for our time period, a lot of times it won't be updated within the assessor data. So we make the decision based on building permit data.
Okay.
So has there been a permit issued for a new building? Has there been a permit issued for a demolition? And that really helps us figure out what's going on there.
Okay,
We also
great.
do rely a lot on the address creation date within the system. If an address was created, 10 plus years, then it's probably not likely that it's a new development that's happening there. So yeah, we rely on a lot of different pieces of data to try and figure that out. It's not just the assessor data that helps us get to that point.
Okay, so you're doing a real eye test, and you've got other data sources that are probably more current. The city has control over. I'm thinking even of like a project that we tried to do. We issued permits for a project that we ended up not being able to build. So, even though there's a address associated with it, it's still vacant. Probably will be when you go to count it or something, but unless something else happens, but you'll catch that through your own kind of analysis of this big vacant piece, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to catch everything because if a building permit has been issued in the last year and an address has been created, we're not going to know if that building is stalled out or if that development has stalled. But if a building permit was issued 3 years ago and there's nothing showing on our new aerial imagery, then we start to dig a little more and say, hey, what's going on here? So yeah, we're not going to catch everything, but we do a pretty good job.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm. All right, so we'll move on to, this is our last slide. Here is just a general overview review of everything that we've talked about so far. So first, with the model, we take a look at all the information at the tax lot level. So the full tax lot we consider. We look at ownership and the tax exemption status to tell us whether or not that lot is committed for public use or not. We look at the assessor property class information. We look at the assessor improvement value. We look at the addresses on the lot, and we look at the building footprints on the lot. All of that goes in to tell us, is it developed? Is it undeveloped? Is it committed? Is it not? We also look at this point, we do a manual. That's when the manual review kicks into gear too, of looking at the information that's conflicting to try and suss out what's going on there. And then once we've got all that information at the tax lot level, is when we dive into what we call fragments. So we look at what's going on the sub-tax lot level within the tax lot. So we look at all of the constrained fragments and all of the committed fragments. Like, is there that BPA easement running through a portion of the lot? Do they have a Goal 5 protected wetland on the lot? Is there a prohibitively steep slope on the lot? And we also look into the existing development that's occurring on the lot. So that's when we look into what's going on within each individual tax lot so that we can figure out exactly how much buildable land is on the lot. And then once we've got all that information, we use it to estimate the density factor for residential capacity based on the overall lot size, its land use or plan designation, the predominant slope of the tax lot, and the elevation of the lot. So any portion of that lot at or above 900 feet in elevation. And all of those factor into what we call our density factor, which is the dwelling units per buildable acre. So we take that, and that's what Heather has talked to you before. All that information comes back to us from growth monitoring. So it's based on recent development trends. So we'll take that density factor for undeveloped and partially vacant lots, and we'll multiply that by the amount of buildable land on those lots. And that excludes any constrained or committed fragments. It also excludes existing development. And then that gives us the estimated residential capacity for those lots. So in a nutshell, that's our buildable lands inventory. And we go ahead and we tally up all that estimated residential capacity, and we come up with an overall number per land use designation across the entire urban growth boundary. So that is the nutshell, and we will get into a lot more detail about capacity at a certain point in more of these future meetings. But that's basically how we go about doing it. Does anyone have any questions?
John, I'm going to call on you, but I'm going to just remind you we have another agenda item. So we have about 14 minutes. So go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. At at some point, I thought that the rules were going to be changing as far as lands that were serviceable. So when we're talking about phantom lands, there's lands that we know will never be served by infrastructure, whether it's because of hills or whatever. Where does that come into play as far as looking at our BLI? Is that more when we're doing an expansion and we can say we don't, this land is not eligible for expansion because it's not serviceable, or is it part of a BLI calculation?
Heather, do you want to take that question?
Sure. Yeah, I think you might be thinking of the development readiness analysis. So that's new analysis that I think we actually were the inspiration for, because the last time we did the urban growth boundary work, Ed McMahon, who was our Home Builders Association representative, was like, we really need to show how much of this buildable lands housing capacity is not served yet by wastewater or water as the two main infrastructures. So we had that. We had our capacity estimates broken out that way. And so we will kind of have to do the same thing, but according to the state's new structure for identifying what is your development ready land. So that's land that is served or basically, within 300 feet of services. And then there's some other provisions, but is essentially served or close to being served, and how much capacity is in that land. And then on the flip side, how much is not development ready. And if you don't have an 8-year land supply of development ready land, then you have to put some actions, infrastructure actions in your housing production strategy. So we're going to do a reminder about what these things are. But a housing production strategy is our 8-year housing action plan. And so if we have, an area that we would, if we served it, we would get, we would bring our, let's say, 6-year capacity up to that 8 years, then we need to put that project in our housing production strategy as an action to get us up to an 8-year development ready land supply. But more to come. We'll definitely be talking about that at this group, but we can't do that until we do the buildable lands inventory and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. So that will come into play at some
Yep.
point.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions on this before we move on to our last agenda item? Okay, our last agenda item, and I will report that I did speak to a couple of people. And so we're gonna do some ETAC elections. We are looking for a new chair and vice chair, and I did speak to a few people that were willing participants. And I don't know, so I'll just say, and I'll let if other folks want to jump in and say anything, but Phil Farrington has agreed to serve as our chair, unless he's changed his mind after we had to do some math. And he would like, and this is for staff, he would like to double the salary that John and I both currently have. So I told him that double of 0 is still 0. So he's in. And then I did speak with Kim Arscott, who couldn't be here tonight, but she was happy to step up and serve as the vice chair and consider, maybe in the future serving as chair. So I'm just going to put that out there. And if anybody would like to make some nominations, I would take those.
I nominate Phil and Kim as chair and vice chair.
I'd be happy to.
Second.
Okay, Eliza has second. John made the motions and Eliza has second. Any discussion?
That sounds great.
Anyone else who's dying to do it? Because I don't want to take it from anyone.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay. You guys can wait your turn and check it out and see how you like it. Okay, so I will then call for questions. So all those in favor, go ahead and just raise your hand like this. I can see them. Okay, so all those in favor, any opposed? And maybe an abstention? Is Phil abstaining? Okay. All right, well, that motion passes. So congratulations, Phil Farrington, you are the new chair. I'm going to just hand it over to you to take us through the last action item, which are next steps in upcoming meetings. And Heather and Elena are going to do that, and then you can close us out.
Well, thanks, Tiffany and John. You've been benevolent rulers over this committee. Thanks so much. No, seriously, I think, I appreciate just tonight this great work that Thea, you and Heather and Elena and whomever else is working behind the scenes on this have been doing. I really do appreciate it. So yeah, last thing on the item is just, Heather, you want to tell us, send us home and tell us where we're going next on this and upcoming dates.
Sure. You have the information on the agenda, but I think that there might be someone that wants to say something in this meeting. So I'm gonna turn it over to that person. You know who you are.
I do. So I've decided that it's time for me to retire from ETAC. Um, I've started this process, I think actually that led into all of this anyway, about 25 years ago. So I've been involved with all of these topics for a long time, not just in my career, but just as part of the volunteering. And I have loved it. It's been so much fun and so interesting and so rewarding. But I feel like it's time, I have a lot of other things that I want to do in my life. And I hope to live another 15 years or so, which would get me to 95. And there are still some things that I want to do, believe it or not, that I haven't done yet. So I think it's a good time for me to leave. And I'm really inspired by the new people who have joined the group. And that's one of the reasons why I feel good about leaving. I feel like there are really good quality people who care a lot about the same topics. And you're going to do a great job. And I know that I compliment the staff all the time, but I just have to take another opportunity to do that too. One of the reasons why this project has been so amazing, and I won't take very long on this, is because of the staff. The quality of work that has come out of this staff is just, it's so superior to anything that I've ever been exposed to and inspiring. And I think you can have a lot of confidence that the information that they're giving you has really been well vetted, well researched, well thought out with, hours and hours and hours, thousands of hours behind it before they make these assumptions and put them out to you for your review. So that part of it has been just really incredible. And then working with the rest of you has been great. I think I think Rick maybe came on a little bit before I did, but otherwise I think I am the longest living person on this project. And I'm so encouraged because when I read the material for today's meeting, I thought, this is what we wanted. This is what we talked about 20 years ago, 18 years ago, 15 years ago. This is exactly what we wanted. And the subtitle of this particular set of slides, Growth Monitoring, Preparing for Change with Better Data, that is exactly what the goal has been all along, so that policy decisions are actually made on the basis of really good information. And I feel like it's just perfect time for me to take my little exit. And thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Sue. My gosh, I'm sad for me and for all of us to be able to not, be able to share your warmth going forward. But you've been terrific and stalwart, leader in the community on this project. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, from all of staff, we just have so appreciated your involvement and just the thread that, continued through this.
Mhm.
Not just your knowledge, which has been super helpful, but just like your steady leadership and your constructive and problem solving approach has just been super appreciated. And I echo Phil. We will so miss you. We love seeing right now, your square even. You just come through like a beam of light always. And so I will miss that for sure. And I'm so excited for you because I know that whatever you do, you're going to have fun doing it. So we'll try to bring that same energy, but we will miss you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. I guess we are scheduled to meet again January 15th in the new year. And is there anything else that we need to cover in the meantime?
I don't think so. As always, we'll try to, let you know as soon as possible if we're not going to meet then. Next year, I keep saying this, but next year is going to be really busy. So I think one thing Elena and I did determine is that we're not going to do, I keep saying I don't think, we are not going to do the full annual growth monitoring report next year. We just will not have time. We will produce the data. There's also some data that isn't available because of the federal database issues. Like we tried to get census data and their site was down because of the shutdown. So that's a whole nother issue, but we will provide the data. We just won't do a lot of commentary about it in the report because we'll be focused on other things, which will all be coming to you. So I just want to kind of flag that, kind of an unusual thing. But don't worry, you'll have plenty to look at.
Well, thanks, everybody. I guess with that, are we adjourned? Okay, and happy holidays to everybody and see you on the flip side. Thanks again, Sue.
Yes,
You're
thank
welcome.
you.
Good job.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
you.
Phil and Tiffany and John.
Thank you, guys.